Hmm. What brought me to kinesiology? It's an important question. It's an interesting question. I think I need to probably address this in two parts, like a macro and a micro, if you like. Um, just to begin with, to lay some context down in terms of my life path. Um, I was born into difficult circumstances, and I had my own trauma and challenges that I dealt with in my childhood, which led to a very confused and a child that was very hurt and didn't understand a lot of things that were going on around him. And I learnt different ways to try and cope with that. And part of me turned to sports and even schoolwork. And I pushed myself to perform at the highest levels, thinking that, if I achieved, if I accomplished, if I became the best at something, then that would somehow bring the acceptance that I was missing as a child. And I think over a period of time through my childhood and into my early teens, when it didn't seem to matter how much I achieved or how far I went with different things that I applied myself to, it never fulfilled that need. And this led through my teenage years with that mixture of hormones and confusion that comes in that period of life. It led to me acting out a lot more. I went from being what you would call, a good, quiet kid, and I started to act out. And, I made some mistakes at that time in my life, which led to a lot of shame and guilt. And that sort of came to a crux for me in my late teens when, some of those behaviors were called up and exposed. And I had to face, the mistakes, but more importantly, I had to face the impact that some of my behaviors and decisions had on the people around me who I loved and who loved me. And so that's a pivotal moment in my life because the the rejection or the judgment on my behaviors and the shame and guilt that brought up basically pushed me on this journey since then to seek out ways to, I don't want to say to better myself or to improve myself, but seeking out ways to heal, perhaps, is a good way to put it. And I guess this is what Hugo has referred to, and I've heard him talk about in the past, as the wounded healer. So in a way, my way to compensate or to find redemption for the mistakes that I perceived I'd made in my life was to, go out there and do amazing, wonderful things to help people. And I think this sort of underlines a big reason why I am in kinesiology and I do what I do. Part of it is a redemption narrative. Um, and so, as I said, throughout my life, I kind of, while I was working, even the work that I chose was always based around my passions and my interests. I refused to follow the pathway that others followed or, ways to make money or ways to create stability. I always followed and did what I thought I loved and wanted to do at that time in my life. Um, and that's what led me to live abroad and to get into teaching and teaching English and drama and other things. But the whole time that I was working and doing these things, I always maintained this deep, intense interest in, like, how do I better myself? How do I heal myself? How do I make the world better? How do I redeem myself? How do I make up? How do I compensate for the mistakes I've made in my life? So I was constantly doing things on the side of work. I'd go and do courses. I'd go and do weekend retreats. I'd go and study workshops of various different modalities. I dabbled in new age stuff. I dabbled in personal growth and development. I dabbled in life coaching. I saw my own therapist. I dabbled in some psychology sessions. I was constantly searching on the side of work in my free time in these other areas to try and heal, I guess, to heal a hurt. And this continued throughout my adult life until approximately maybe around about 2011. And this is probably more pertinent to what brought me to kinesiology now. And it was in 2011 when I was teaching, applied drama and English. And I was doing it from the perspective of, wanting to help people and to improve communication skills, self-confidence, presentation, these sorts of things. But what happened in 2011 is I had a complete breakdown. And despite my best interests, either on the side or through my work and my, moving forward, I still wasn't able to heal in the way that I had wanted to. So in 2011, I had a complete breakdown and I could no longer continue the work that I was doing in Hong Kong at that time. And it was at this time that I took time away from my work. I spoke to my bosses and they were very supportive and understanding. They were happy to give me the time off that I needed. And I headed back to Australia at that time in 2011. And I basically reconnected with a man in Australia. His name's Nam Baldwin on the Gold Coast. And at that stage, I had actually done some sessions with him about 10 years previously. My mother had introduced me to him and said, oh, there's this guy, I think you should go and meet. I think you guys will connect. He's interesting. So I'd done one or two sessions about 10 years previously. So I knew Nam. And so when this breakdown happened in 2011, he was the first person that I thought of. So I went back to Australia. I contacted Nam and I basically did some intensive sessions and work on myself over that month with Nam. Now, Nam does some kinesiology, or he had done some kinesiology. I think his background was mainly touch for health. So it wasn't his primary modality. Nam has done a lot of different things. He's driven and he studies. These days he does a lot of work with breath work and high performance work. You can look him up and find out about him. But anyway, I did this work with Nam over a month, and I started trying to put the pieces back together and to sort of rebuild myself. And it was in this process of working with Nam, as I gradually worked through this and started to find my feet again, that I just had this insight, this moment in a session with Nam where I stopped and I was like, oh my God, I want to be doing exactly what you're doing. So what Nam was doing for me and that support for me in that moment and how I felt in that support, this is what I wanted to do and give to others. And, I knew of Nam's background in kinesiology, and I didn't know much about kinesiology at that stage. I was experiencing the muscle testing. And so what I did was I decided I wanted to go and learn this kinesiology. And so when I returned to Hong Kong in 2011, I started researching possible kinesiology courses. And that's when I discovered Brett Scott here in Hong Kong. He'd opened up Kinesiology Asia and started pioneering kinesiology here in Hong Kong from about 2006. I found Brett. I didn't know anything about Brett. So I remember, writing to Nam and saying, oh, look, Nam, I found this guy in Hong Kong. He teaches courses in kinesiology. Is he any good? Do you know anything about him? He said, look, I don't know that many people in the kinesiology world these days, but here's a bunch of questions to ask him. So I emailed off these questions to Brett and he emailed back and, basically, Nam had a look at his reply and his background, his study, said, yep, look, he's legit. No problems, jump in there and do it. So that was the start of my kinesiology journey. In 2011, I started undertaking, I think we started with kinetic workshops in those days, in the early days. And for the next 2 years, which I'd taken completely off work to free myself up to just immerse myself in kinesiology study, which is what I did. And shortly after I'd started with the early days of kinetic, Brett started to also bring on neuroenergetic kinesiology. And I had an opportunity to really immerse myself in something that was far more expansive and comprehensive. And I found that when I started learning the neuroenergetic kinesiology, it just tended to resonate more for me. And so, yeah, that was the start of my kinesiology journey, and that's what brought me here.